Listen today and a story I'll tell. Sadness and tears and die. Dreadful cyclone that came our way blew our schoolhouse away. Rye Cove,
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 Rye Cove.
place in my childhood and home. Heard life's early morning, Lord, I once loved to roam, and now so silent and alone. Give us a home far beyond the blue sky. Storms and cyclones are unknown. At the end of life's strand, we're gonna meet at God's hand, children in a heavenly home. Rye Cove,
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 Rye Cove.
place in my childhood and home. When life's early morning, Lord, I once loved alone, and now so silent and alone. And now so silent and alone.
Steve, you know, we tend to think, I think, in the mountains, this is me, we tend to think, I think this, that sometimes being in the mountains, you know, it's a different way of life, but it's almost like we're, I don't know, impervious to certain things. Because I know when I was growing up, a lot of people would say, nah, tornadoes wouldn't hit here in the mountains and so forth. And I was never told this story about the Rye Cove cyclone until later on when I became an adult. And I found out that this really happened. And it's like, this was terrible. And this happened, you know, in the valley, of course, in a big valley down in Scott County. But what it did and how it came about and how all this took place, it's just amazing. It's just incredible. And then what ended up having to go into place after that, getting people, survivors and so forth, and then trying to reestablish life again. It's just incredible.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And going back to what you said about feeling impervious to tornadoes, yeah, I grew up with that as well, except that I do remember in the early 70s, there was a huge outbreak of tornadoes. Mm-hmm. And they came marching up the valley from Lee County and ended up stopping at the Wise County-Lee County line. I do remember that.
Wow.
So we didn't get hit with any of that, although some folks down in Lee County did get some tornadoes. But we're not impervious to all of it. But you'd think we'd be impervious to earthquakes. And as you know at this point, that's not true either.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Well, for this story, folks, we're going to go back to 1929, May 2nd of that year, when a powerful tornado outbreak swept from southwest to northeast along the Appalachian Mountains, affecting states like Oklahoma, Maryland, and especially in Virginia. Now, what made this outbreak stand out was the sheer scale of destruction that it caused. At least 42 people lost their lives, and over 300 were injured in what's considered one of the most intense tornado outbreaks in the Appalachian region. Among the hardest hit areas was Little Rye Cove, Virginia, in Scott County.
Rye Cove bore the brunt of nature's fury that day. The F2 tornado that struck the area remains the deadliest tornado in Virginia's history and is tied for the 13th deadliest to hit a school in the entire United States. The storm came roaring up the little valley toward Rye Cove, hitting at about 1 in the afternoon, just after lunch recess. So the kids were finished up with recess. They had gone back into the school, and directly in its path at the Rye Cove School was this 2-story building with 7 rooms. You might not think that's too much, but still, the pictures I've seen of it, it was a sight to behold. It was a nice-looking building. One of the eyewitnesses, the school's principal, A.S. Noblin, vividly described the harrowing moments leading up to the disaster. Noblin recounted of how he saw the ominous dark cloud approaching, swirling with destructive force. Trees bent, winds howled, and within moments the school was in the tornado's path. And that's not just to mention, Steve, other accounts that they said of how the weather was just prior to that, and suddenly they said that everything that was light suddenly turned dark. And then that famous noise that everybody has talked about at one time or another that sounded like a freight train. That was the thing that really stood out with a lot of people.
Indeed. And all this happened suddenly, while some children were just coming inside from lunch break playing outside. The storm hit with fury right then, catching everyone off guard. The scene was chaotic, with children scrambling for safety inside as the tornado ripped through the landscape. The school, though, offered little shelter, as it stood no chance against this powerful storm. The tornado quickly tore the roof off the school, pulled at its structure, and caused a wood stove inside to erupt in flames as the building collapsed. The destruction was swift and devastating. The storm also uprooted trees, lifted the roofs off neighboring buildings, destroyed a flour mill, and pulled all the contents of a store out into the open, scattering them to the 4 winds.
Well, get this, Steve. Debris, including a lumber pile, furniture from a house, in the path of the cyclone was scattered over an area of a 1/4 mile wide and 3 miles long. As the dust settled and the extent of the human tragedy became apparent, it was relief efforts that suddenly sprang toward everybody, I guess, with action. William D. Smith, the superintendent of Scott County Schools, arrived at Rye Cove to a scene that was just full of chaos and devastation. Mr. Smith found the only copy of the school's roll had been destroyed in the tornado, and without it, there was no way to make sure that any of these students, they could account for them, missing, injured, or even deceased. Making matters worse, if that were possible, accompanying the tornado was heavy rain, and I've been told it was almost torrential rain is what it was, which fell relentlessly as frantic parents arrived trying to find out some kind of news about their loved ones. Well, then reporters soon started to arrive to record what witnesses had seen. One of them, high school teacher Elizabeth Richmond, described to the then Kingsport Times of how the building collapsed in mere seconds and the wind started to howl, leaving no time for anyone to seek cover.
Unfortunately, 12 children lost their lives that day, along with one teacher, Mary Ava Carter, who was a young first-grade teacher who had recently graduated from Radford State Teachers College. Her body was found yards away from the school, a poignant reminder of that storm's ferocity. In the aftermath of the disaster, survivors were rushed to nearby towns for medical care. Some made their way to Clinchport to board the Southern Railroad train for transport to a hospital in Bristol, while others were taken by ambulance to nearby Kingsport, Tennessee. Getting help to Rye Cove, though, was no easy task at that time. The narrow, twisting, and partly paved road made transportation difficult for both survivors and relief workers, especially with that rain that Rod just talked about that came with the storm. The community faced immense challenges in accessing aid and providing care to those in need. And, Rod, there was somebody we've all heard about who actually pitched in and helped out at that time, wasn't there?
Yeah. Among the many who rushed to Rye Cove to lend a hand was a familiar name in the region, and his name was Scott County native, not that, but A.P. Carter. By May of 1929, he, his wife Sarah, and her cousin Maybelle were already making waves in the music world as the Carter family. Well, their popularity had soared, with their records selling in the hundreds of thousands. Their journey, as you know, began back in the summer of 1927 during the Bristol recording sessions with Ralph Peer, when they became a huge part of the new wave of country music that swept over the country. Now, when the storm hit, A.P. Carter was in the next valley, witnessing the unfolding disaster. He described a surreal sight, a yellow-looking cloud rolling ominously as rain fell, signaling the approaching calamity that he knew was headed toward the school.
And Mr. Carter wasted no time. He climbed into his red Chevrolet sedan and navigated the wet, rugged roads toward Rye Cove. Smoke billowed above the trees, marking the devastation that had struck the school. When he arrived, Carter was met with a gruesome sight. Bodies of the dead and injured lay scattered in the fields, rain-soaked survivors huddled together, and volunteers worked tirelessly to douse fires and clear debris. Without hesitation, he jumped in to help those carrying bodies and helping the injured get into trucks and cars to be taken to the hospital. A.P. Carter was so deeply moved by the tragedy he witnessed, he later sat down and composed a song he titled The Cyclone of Rye Cove.
The Carter family recorded this poignant tune that same year for RCA Victor, immortalizing the storm and honoring the memories of those affected. While not one of their biggest hits, it has been re-recorded by a number of other groups and remains as a permanent reminder of that tragedy that befell Rye Cove in 1929. Well, meanwhile, parents of school children who survived and shared their harrowing experiences. Jim Morrison, in an interview with the Johnson City Staff News, recounted the terror of seeing the tornado strike the school and the frantic moments of searching for his son amidst the rubble. And in the weeks following the cyclone, the Virginia State Department of Education sent a photographer to document the devastation for posterity. Rather than leave the site, and simply leave it as a grim memorial to the storm, the community rallied together, and by the autumn of 1930, they built a new school, the Rye Cove Memorial High School, which was opened for its first class as a testament to Appalachian resilience.
And today, a brick memorial stands with the original school bell bearing the names of the 13 victims who lost their lives that tragic day. Now, the memory of those victims lives on in the hearts of those who remember and honor their legacy. And those who lost their lives included Millie Stone, Polly Carter, Bruce Cox, Bertha Darnell, James Carter, Bernice Fletcher, Callie Bishop, Emma Lane, Lily Carter, Monty Carter, Guy Davidson, Monty Bishop, and the teacher, Ava Carter. And Rod, this certainly was a tragedy. It certainly was. And I want to get back to what you said about taking them to Bristol. I think the reason that they did that is because the roads between Kingsport and Rye Cove at that time were not that really nice 4-lane they've got now, but it was just a windy country road that went up into the mountains. The train, which ran through Mendota, that's where the trail is now, took them straight to Bristol on a train that just sped right along. So it was quicker just to get to Bristol than to get to Kingsport, which was twice as close as Bristol is.
Everybody rallied together eventually before all was said and done. They eventually rallied together, but still, that's just something that you don't picture, something like that happening, especially here in the Appalachian region. But Steve, again, like you said about earthquakes and so forth, I wasn't around, wasn't in Big Stone when the tornado hit, and what was it, 08, I guess is when it was, 2008. Yeah. And I'd never seen anything like that in my life before, of how one home on one side of the road there on 58 going out of Big Stone, one house could be touched and demolished and obliterated, splinters, and then right across the road, the other house is still standing. That's what amazed me so much. And then Bullitt Park, seeing the trees all those pine trees and all those trees that were over there against where the cabin existed. I think they used to have Boy Scouts or something over at that cabin somewhere near Bullitt Park. And then it was almost like you could see the progression almost of the way that the funnel had came down and then suddenly left. It was just unreal. And so, I'm sure these people, these kids and the adults, had no time to react to anything like that, to be able to notice anything. This was, hate to say it, just about every person for themselves to try to go and try to survive this thing if they could.
Yeah, tornadoes are strange things.
Yeah.
When I was in the first grade, I lived in Indiana, and a tornado came through our town. And it came down the street in front of our house.
Wow.
Did not touch either side of the street. It just came directly down the street, picking up garbage cans and everything else as it went by. But the funnel was so narrow, you could just see it zip right down the road just as fast as it could go. That was terrifying for a 6-year-old, not to mention an adult, to be honest. I couldn't imagine what these kids went through.
Yeah, I can't imagine it either. And then I think there's also been stories, too. The description of the school when the cyclone or the tornado hit the school, there are people that said, okay, it was very dark, couldn't see a whole lot of things. But there are some people that said this thing was just like when the pressure equalized out or whatever and the tornado hit, it was just like kablam. Everything went everywhere, all over the place. So you have to remember, too, maybe some of these people weren't directly affected by the tornado, but by flying debris that could have hit some of these people. That's always a scary thing in a tornado as well.
And that, folks, is the tragic story of the Rye Cove cyclone, another one of the stories of Appalachia. Thanks for watching. Be sure to go down below and click that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up if you don't mind, and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.